Hello everyone, I'm here with my next video on the chapter Silk Road by Nick Middleton. This is for class 11th from the book Hornbill. In this chapter, I have covered the whole chapter has been covered in the form of question and answers. If you want line by line explanation, please go through the live session videos that is there in the channel. There are 3 parts. You will definitely get a feeling as if you are studying in the class. Now let us continue with our question and answers video. So let us start with the question and answers. Question 1. Describe Nick Middleton's journey from Ravu to Hor. The author, Nick Middleton, started on a pilgrimage to Mount Kailash. He was to do the Kora. He left Ravu one early morning in the taxi of Setan. A Lamo woman gave him a long-sleeved sheepskin coat as a farewell present. Such coats are worn by Drogpas to keep away the cold. Setan took a shortcut to get off the Chentang that would take them directly towards Kailash. During the drive, they crossed vast grassy plains, followed by the stony plains and then arid pastures. They saw a few gazelles and wild asses called Kayang. Then came the hills where a few solitary Drogpas tended to their flocks. There were nomads, dark dens guarded by Tibetan mastiffs. Soon they approached the snow-capped mountains where the ride became bumpy with sharp turns. The car had to be stopped as there was ice on the track for nearly 15 meters. Setan and the others threw dust on the ice and so that the car could move on. This happened at the height of 5210 meters. The author started developing a headache. A large cairn of rocks marked the top of the pass at a height of 5515 meters. They took the car in a turn around the cairn according to the tradition. The author, Daniel, and Setan, the driver, carried down the pass to the other side. The author's headache cleared and they stopped for lunch at 2 p.m. By late afternoon, they reached the small town of Hor, which was on the shore of sacred lake Mansarovar. Daniel parted company and went to Lhasa. Setan had to repair the punctured tires, so he sent the author to a cafe for half an hour. The town did not attract the author. Though it was near Mansarovar, it was dirty and full of refuse. When Setan returned, the author was glad to continue his journey. Now this is a clip from my live session video. I had made this specially for your understanding. So let us go through this. This is in the live session. Go through all the 3 live sessions if you have time. You will really get all your doubts cleared off. Anyways, right now let us quickly do the journey which is there in this slide. This is Nick Middleton's journey. So let us see. The author, as I have told you, Nick Middleton, started from Ravu early one morning. He was starting on his pilgrimage to Mount Kailash for its Kora. I have already told you he was going for Kora. What Kora is, we'll do it in the other question. On this occasion, a woman named Lamo gave him a farewell present. So I have mentioned it here. Lamo gave a sheepskin. I have written on the board. Then it was the dress that she gave. it was a long-sleeved sheepskin coat. Such coats are worn by the Drogpas to keep away the cold, as I have told you. Right? There was another person traveling with Nick Middleton, that was Daniel, and Setan was the driver. Daniel was going to Darchen and so had thought to accompany them in their journey till Darchen. Setan took a shortcut to take the author almost directly towards Kailash. This shortcut took them across the vast open plains with nothing except a few gazelles in them. You can see he took a shortcut that is from Chantang. He went to southwest where they reached vast open plains. We have already read about this in the previous question. And on these plains, only gazelles could be found. On going further, they saw a herd of wild ass, which are known as kayang. Alright, they actually saw the cloud of mud rising and they didn't know what it was, and then on going nearer they realized that it was a herd of wild ass. The wild ass were galloping and these wild ass were known as kayang. Right, then moving on, they saw, going further, they came across solitary Drogpas who were tending their flocks. Moving further, they saw dark tents of the nomads, and in front of every tent they had their Tibetan mastiffs who were guarding the tents of their masters. On moving further, the snow-capped mountains came into view. The ride became very bumpy. At one point, the car had to stop because it was so bumpier. There was ice on the track for about 15 meters, and so they had to stop there. They threw some dust on the ice and then the car moved on so that the car may not slip. Alright. This happened at the height of 5210 meters. So this is there on the board that is visible here in this slide. This is from my live session video. If you want to really understand every detail again, line by line explanation, go through the live session videos. This is another slide of regarding the rest of the journey. This is from my live session. Now let us move further. Now, as I told you in the previous slide that they had reached a place where there was an icy river and that was frozen, and then they saw that there was a 15-meter long trail of a snowy road. It was all very slippery. They had to get down, and Setan and Daniel, they sprinkled mud on the snow so that their vehicle would not slip. They walked a distance and then they reached the cane of rocks. The prayer flags were seen, and the author along with the other persons, that is Daniel and Setan, took a turn round the cane in a clockwise direction as it was the tradition. By this time the author was having a very bad, that is severe headache, and usually people have at this altitude because there's less of oxygen over there. All right, and so after that, moving further, they reached a petrol pump. All right, and after that they could hear a hissing sound over there when the petrol is put. We all have seen, and this is very evident, and it is also because the lower the atmospheric pressure, so then it allows the fuel to expand, right? So after moving out of this petrol pump, it was around 2 o'clock. They carried down the other side of the pass and they were very hungry for lunch. They stopped at a place and they had hot noodles inside a long canvas tent, right? And here there was the dry salt lake. The plateau here is pockmarked with salt flats and the salty lakes. In your book it is mentioned brackish lakes, but that means the salty lakes, and vestiges that is partially few parts of Tethys Ocean which bordered Tibet could be seen from there. On moving further, they saw that there was a hive that was on activity with a lot of men with pickaxes and shovels trudging back and forth in long sheepskin coats. That is, you have already read about these coats, and salt encrusted boots. All wore sunglasses against the glare as a steady stream of blue bricks emerged from the blindingly white lake laden with piles of salt. So they saw men working with their pickaxes and shovels. Alright. By late afternoon, they reached the small town of Hor. Right. And Daniel got a truck from there so that he could go from Lhasa to Kashmir. He had to go to Kashmir. So now Setan and our protagonist, that is the narrator, were left. Daniel had already taken the truck and gone in the direction of Kashmir, right? Next, Setan had to get his tires repaired. They were punctured tires, so he had to stop there. And before going to this shop to get their tire repaired, he dropped our narrator at a place where he could have some coffee. Now when they reached Hor, the narrator noticed that Hor was a grim and miserable place. Although he had heard a lot about Hor, but he was actually very disappointed. I have answers on all of these, but let me tell you that this was a very grim and miserable place. There was no vegetation all around. It was all dusty and rocky. All right. And liberally scattered with years of accumulated refuse. There was a lot of waste, lot of refuse over here, which was very unfortunate for this town, which is famous for its river, that is Lake Mansarovar. All right, and it is Tibet's most venerated stretch of water. Ancient Hindu and Buddhist cosmology in fact pinpoints Mansarovar as the source of 4 great Indian rivers, as I have written on the board, that is Indus, Ganga, Brahmaputra and Satluj. Alright, so the view of Hor actually disappointed our narrator. When he was there at the cafe, he was served by a Chinese youth, all right, and he was served by a Chinese youth. Now then again the narrator goes on to say, he tells about Ikai Kawaguchi, a Japanese monk who had arrived there in 1900. Now this is, when he was sitting there and he was observing things, it was at that time he remembered what all he had read. So he says that he had read about Ikai Kawaguchi. He was a Japanese monk who had arrived there, that is in Hor, in 1900 and was so moved by the sanctity and peacefulness and beauty of Lake Mansarovar that he burst into tears. Yes, Lake Mansarovar was very beautiful to look at, but all around the town it was all very disgusting. This is our narrator's viewpoint. Alright, and a couple of years later, after the account written by Ikai Kawaguchi, a couple of years later, the hallowed waters had similar effect on Sivan Hedden. He was a Sweden man who wasn't prone to sentimental outbursts, but when he saw the view of Lake Mansarovar, he really got emotional. So all this is here on the board. Moving on further with questions. What was the purpose of author's journey to Mount Kailash? The answer is, the author went on a journey to Mount Kailash to do the Kora as is the tradition. Now what is Kora? The Kora signifies a rite of circumambulating the holy mountain. That is, taking a full circle around it. For this, the author adopted the silk route to reach Mount Kailash and faced heavy odds to reach there. Next question. Comment on Setan's support to the author during the journey. Setan was a good and efficient driver. He drove the car very carefully. During the journey, he spoke to the author, giving information that the places they were visiting. Setan on his way surveyed the snow on the path by stamping on it. It was not too deep, but in the case they slipped, the car could turn over. Hence, to cover the risk, they flung a handful of dirt and flung them across the frozen surface. When the snow was spread with soil, they drove without difficulty. 10 minutes later, they stopped at another blockage. This time, they decided to drive around the snow. However, the risk did not undermine the scenic beauty of the place. In the valley, they saw snow-capped mountains and the river was wide but mostly blocked with ice that was sparkling in the sunshine. As they moved ahead on their upward track, the turns became sharper and the ride bumpier. The rocks around were covered with patches of bright orange lichen. Under the rock around seemed unending shade. He was caring. At Darchen, when he found that the author was not well, he took him to the medical college and got medicine for him. He was a good Buddhist. Next question. What do you know about Tibetan Mastiffs? Tibetan Mastiffs, huge and ferocious dogs, were quite popular in China's imperial courts because they were good hunting dogs and also good guards. These Tibetan Mastiffs guarded the dark tents of the nomads pitched in isolation. These huge black dogs would raise their big heads when they became aware of people approaching and stared at them. As they drew closer, they would explode into action like bullets and rush towards them and chase them for about 100 meters. These hairy dogs usually wore bright and red collars and barked angrily with enormous jaws. They were absolutely fearless of their vehicle and would run straight onto their way. Next question. As a good Buddhist, he knew that it didn't really matter if I passed away, but he thought it would be bad for business. Substantiate. The answer is, Setan was a good Buddhist who believed that death was the final nirvana. Moreover, Kailash was a holy place. However, he felt that his death would demotivate the tourists from coming and hence be bad for their business. It would be bad for his business as his credibility would be at stake in looking after the tourists. Next question. Why did the author take the shortcut in spite of high mountain passes? The answer is, the author took the shortcut because it would take them southwest almost directly towards Mount Kailash. Crossing high mountains passes posed breathing problems. Absence of snow meant a fairly easy ride. Next question. Who are Drogpas? What were Drogpas going in rocky wilderness? Drogpas are hill tribes. They wear long sleeve sheepskin coat to protect themselves from the cold of the high mountains. They would pause and stare at the travelers and their cars. Occasionally they waved at the passing travelers. Drogpas lived in the dark tents guarded by huge black mastiffs. As hills started to push up once more from the arid pastures, solitary men or women, Drogpas were seen tending their flocks in the rocky wilderness. Next question. Write a note on author Nick Middleton's stay at Darchen and his meeting with Norbu. Nick Middleton and Setan the driver reached Darchen at 10:30 p.m. The author checked into the guest house for the night. He could not sleep because of the blockage in his nose. He spent a troublesome night. In the morning, Setan took him to Darchen Medical College where the Tibetan doctor gave him medicine. When the author got well, Setan went back. The author was alone in Darchen waiting for the pilgrimage season to begin. He had arrived early and was disappointed to see no pilgrims. He became restless and forced himself to think positively. It was then that he met a man called Norbu in a cafe. He was Tibetan who worked in Beijing and was writing academic papers about the Kora to Mount Kailash. The author was relieved to meet Norbu as he was the ideal companion to do the Kora with. Next question. What did the author notice in the vast open plains after leaving Ravu? These vast open plains had only dry pastures. A few gazelles could be seen nibbling the grass in those arid pastures. When the plains grew stonier than grass, great herds of wild asses on kayangs were seen moving together. Next question. Who gave the narrator a farewell present and was the present given at Ravu? The narrator was about to leave Ravu for Mount Kailash to do the Kora when Lamo, a Tibetan woman, wanted to give a farewell present. She wanted to give the narrator some warm clothes. She gave one of the long-sleeved sheepskin coats that all the men wore. Why was the author disappointed with Darchen? Darchen was dusty, partially derelict and punctuated by heaps of rubble and refuse. The slow-moving and sleepy town had a couple of simple general stores selling Chinese cigarettes, soap and other basic necessities as well as usual strings of prayer flags. The high altitude was giving him health problems. He had a bad cold and was not able to sleep at night. Since he was one of the early arrivals, there weren't any pilgrims coming to the place. Thus, he was disappointed with Darchen. Next question. Describe the author's physical condition in Darchen. How did the doctor treat him? It was a disturbed night. The author had a bad cold and his nostrils got blocked. He had to breathe through the mouth. He was tired and hungry as well. When he had barely slept, he woke up abruptly. He felt heaviness in his chest. He sat up and cleared his nasal passage. He felt relieved though he felt he was not well. He was unable to sleep. He feared he might die in sleep, so he kept awake. The next day, Setan took him to Darchen Medical College. The Tibetan doctor gave him 5-day course. He came out with brown envelope which had 15 screws of paper. After having breakfast, he opened the after breakfast package which had a brown powder which he had to take with hot water. It tasted like cinnamon and The lunchtime and bedtime packages were nearly the same. They looked like sheep dung. Both had small spherical brown packages. After taking the full day medicine, he slept peacefully that night. Next question. Why did the narrator feel that perhaps Norbu could turn out to be an ideal companion? The answer is, the narrator was heading for Mount Kailash to complete the Kora. Originally, he had thought of making the trek in the company of devout believers. Then he met Norbu, who was a Tibetan and, like the author, was there to do Kora. Norbu knew English and could answer many of his questions. He also suggested hiring some yaks to carry their luggage. All these things suited the narrator, and so he thought that Norbu could be an ideal companion for him. Next question. I hadn't made much progress with my self-help program on positive thinking. Why does the narrator feel so? The narrator was very disappointed with Darchen. It was dusty with heaps of rubble and refuse, but he was even more disappointed as there were no pilgrims. As his mind went over the drawbacks of the place, he concluded that he hadn't made much progress on his self-help program on positive thinking. In that case, he would have been more accepting and optimistic. Next question. How did Satan maneuver across the first patch of snow that they came across? The answer is, Satan stopped at a tight bend and got out because the snow had covered the path in front of them. This unexpected depository was too steep for their vehicle to mount. Satan stepped onto the covered snow and stamped his foot to determine how sturdy it was. The snow was not deep, but the car could turn over. Satan took a handful of dirt and threw them on the frozen surface. Daniel and the narrator too joined in. When the snow was spread with soil, Satan backed up the vehicle and drove towards the dirty snow. The car moved across the icy surface without noticeable difficulty. I hope this video will be helpful to each one of you. I have tried to cover each and every point, and all the steps have been covered of the chapter. There are live sessions. As I have told you before, there are 3 live sessions. Do go through that for line by line explanation. Thank you everyone. If you are a newcomer to my channel, please press the subscribe button, also the bell icon for the latest notifications. Do take good care of yourself. Bye.